in my veins, blue in one eye, red, white, and blue in my brain. I'm bulldog born, bulldog, that's my breed. I was born to follow where the bulldogs lead.
Ladies and gentlemen, from 1978 to 1995, this man sold more candy than Cadbury's. It's none other than the king of Footscray, Dougie Hawkins.
How are you, Matty? Matty, that's a magnificent introduction. Very well done, Matty. And can you believe that, Matty? 78.
Come on.
Matty, when it all started now. That's now, Matty. 47 years ago, I had my first game.
Oh, come on.
Is that right, Matty? 47? Is that 47 years ago?
That's right.
Jesus Christ. I remember it, Matty, against North Melbourne. God, and at the Whitten Oval, ran out in the ground. There it was with Gary Dempsey, Colin Templeton, Teddy Whitten Jr., Alan Stoner, against the mighty Kangaroos. God, 47 years ago. Anyway.
Unbelievable how time flies. And, Dougie. Well, today we've got a man who you played with not too long after your debut. Well, in 1985, he crossed over from Essendon. 166 centimetres of him, Tony Buhagiar.
Yeah, Matty, the old Budgie, the bloody Budgie, mate. Matty, before he come to the Bulldogs, I know he obviously come from Western Australia. I'm not sure, Matty, what was it, Perth or East Fremantle or something? It might have been. I got a feeling, Matty, if I'm looking back now, Budgie, Jimmy Sewell, Andrew Purser, I reckon they all come from East Fremantle, Matty. Does that sound right?
Yeah, he was an East Fremantle boy. Yep.
East Fremantle.
Yep.
Mate, he come over here, Budgie. I loved him, mate. I watched him at Essendon. As you mentioned, is he smaller than Libba or is he bigger than Libba? He wasn't.
So Libba was 164, so he's only 2 centimetres taller than Tony.
Taller than Tony.
Yep.
But you know what he had, Matty? He had that. He had a great ticker, great courage, had tricks. He was just hard at the footy. I love Budgie. I loved when and I was wrapped when Mick Moldhouse went and got him to come over. Was it the start of 85, Matty? Only the 1 year?
Yeah, that's right. So he in the 1984 prelim final for the Bombers, he had 25 touches and kicked a couple of goals, and then somehow Sheeds didn't pick him for the grand final, and the Bombers went on to be a premiership. So I think Tony was maybe his card was marked and he was looking for a change, and it was our fortune that he came to the Dogs.
You got to have a look for the 85 one. 84 one, then he come over to us. Gee, that's surprising. I can hear those stats in that.
You stiff.
Please explain, Sheeds. Please explain. And no wonder Mick went and chased him. You know, us in 84, I think we needed Matty to beat Collingwood last game to probably make the finals. We were right in the mix in 84, Mick's first year. And he identified that we needed that hardness around the footy to back up, Choco Royal in that area. And Budgie sort of brought that. And not only was he good in the midfield, he was a good goal sneak too, Matty. And he was tough and he was hard. He kept the footy in. I remember one day I kicked this goal, Matty. And I ran past him. I said, "How good was that, Budge?" I said, "How good was the Hawk?" He said, "Mate, that was just magnificent."
You're talking yourself up, Dougie.
Well, we used to have this banter on the ground, me and Budgie. We'd have a laugh and a giggle after we did something good. He'd come past and go, "How was that? Well, how good was I there?" And I'd say, "Budgie, what about that one about 2 minutes ago? How good was I?" So we would have that little bit of banter together. And Matty, I thought his finals in 85 was pretty good. He played pretty well, against North Melbourne, and obviously in that prelim final. It was a tough game. The qualifying final, mate, we got absolutely smashed. So it wasn't anyone's fault. We just weren't good enough as a unit. But his semi-final performance against North was terrific. His ability to keep the footy in and hunt it. And outside of that, Matty was just a fantastic bloke. He was a really good fella. Budgie, I loved him. He's been very successful in business over in Western Australia regarding the hotel industry. He's bought and owned hotels. He owns that one, Matty, right with other people, obviously, right next to the ground, Optus Oval. Oh. I think it holds about 5,000 people. It's a big bar there right next to the ground. He has an interest and a share in that. So business-wise, Budgie's done very, very well. He's been very, very successful. And just in closing on him, Matty, again, I'll say it again, it might sound like a broken record. He was a fantastic bloke, and a terrific player in his own right. Hard, tough, had tricks. And I loved him as a bloke, Budgie, just a ripper bloke.
Love it, love it. Whenever I see Budgie, he's just got this beaming smile.
Yeah, he's a happy-go-lucky fella, and we got along because of that. I'm easy-going sort of bloke, and I'm always pretty happy. But he's a happy-go-lucky bloke, and so am I, and we got along very, very well, Matty, at the Kennel.
Love it. Love to hear that, Dougie. And you know what else I'm hearing?
It's a knock on the door. Here comes Budgie.
Bring him in.
Come on, Budge. Woohoo.
Thanks, Hawk. Ladies and gentlemen, he played 251 games and he snagged 462 goals in his incredible career across 2 different states. Ladies and gentlemen, it's the cold hero from the West, Tony the Budgie Buhagiar.
Oh, that's a great introduction. I love that.
Well, we love you, Tony. We're absolutely delighted to have you on. And Bulldog supporters have been asking me, get the Budgie inside the kennel. So we've captured you today. And
I'm thrilled to bits. Yeah, there's a very soft spot in my heart for the doggies. Absolutely.
That's music to my ears, Tony. All right, well, listen, we ask every one of our guests to start off by saying, how would you describe yourself as a player in your own words?
Oh, God, tough question. Well, they didn't come any smaller. So, I reckon I would, if I would love to have been called, I called myself 5'6", but I reckon I was about 5'5", or if I'm lucky. So when you're that small, there's only one way you can play, and that's to bore in and get the ball. So obviously my aim was always to be at the coalface. And if you could turn around and sort of receive it, I reckon you always had to kick 2 goals. If you kick 2 goals a game, you don't get dropped. So my big thing was always to stay in the side. And I suppose it was to be at the front end. I was elbow height. So you just had to be there and in and under, and then try and sort of feed the ball out. But, I was really thrilled. I was only there for 1 year, but I played with Brian Royal. He was a gun. He could seriously rove, and as a rover, he was so good at clearances. If when you watch his replays and that sort of thing, there were so many times he would get the ball straight out of the centre. So loved roving with him, and so I was a rover all my life. I couldn't play in any other position, and so that's basically what I was.
Amazing. Well, just to put it in context for those who didn't get to watch you play, Budgie, you were 5 centimetres shorter than Caleb Daniel. So you would have been the smallest player in today's competition, which is incredible.
Well, look, you're right. Obviously this generation are a lot taller, but I would have no chance of being drafted. I would not even be considered. I would not be an option.
Well, that just sounds so small-minded of today's, I know they're more sort of an athletic profile, but, you look back in history, your Dale Waitmans, Tony Liberatore for the Dogs, a Brownlow medalist, these guys were...
And how tough was he as a player?
Oh, come on. So...
But what's happened is there's a transition going back for smaller players. So, when you look at Watson at Hawthorn, and even yesterday, that Jones for GWS, like those, you need small players. You need guys at the bottom of the pack, and there are, it's such a congested game. You need small players. They're coming back to life.
They're coming back, Tony. Well, we've had a bit of an injury crisis at the Dogs. If another small forward goes down, don't be surprised if you get the call up, bud.
No. Well, I'd like to think I could, but no, I think my days are over.
Love it. Listen, take us back to the beginning. Were your family members into footy? How did the love affair of football begin for you?
Well, as we had spoken a little bit earlier, so being Maltese, my dad wanted me playing soccer. And what happened was, fortunately, we lived very close to East Fremantle Oval, and I played for East Fremantle. But I'd hear this roar of the crowd, and I'd go, what is this game? It was sort of like some gladiator game or something with the boos. You'd hear this massive roar of boos. Anyway, I said, it's a stupid game they play in Australia. You don't want that. You don't want that. You want to play soccer. So anyway, I finally got to watch a game when I was about 9 years old, and I was obsessed with it. I just fell in love with football. I never missed a game. I would just be infatuated with, and after school, I'd go and kick the footy. So my love of football was really around about from 9 years of age. And even now, I'm still obsessed with football. Absolutely love the game. Even though my parents had no idea what the game was, in the end, Dad loved it. He would go to every game and just loved football. So, it was an interesting experience in the earlier days, but look, I mean, I just love the game.
Love that transition there. Well, bad luck, Dad, but but the doggies and the Bombers, it was our gain. So fantastic. Now, it's really curious to me because you got the nickname the Budgie. I used to hear the great Lou Richards calling you the little Budgie with such a. Was that where the nickname was coined, or did it happen earlier on?
No. What actually happened was when I go back to the start. So I would kick a footy all day long. I was down the park at the Oval, which I was going to. I was with my brother having shots at goal, and the coach of the side, under 12 side, who was maybe 50 metres away, yelled and shouted us to get out of the way. And then he called me over and he said, "Hey, who do you play for? What are you doing here?" And I said, "Look, I don't play for anyone. I don't play footy." And he said, "How old are you?" Anyway, he said, "We need players this week. You've got to play. I want you to play." And I said, "Yeah, no worries." He said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Tony Buhagiar." And he said, "What?" That's exactly how it went. He said, "From now on, you're Budgie Buhagiar." So I got it from my first training session at the under 12s of East Fremantle. And that's all I've ever called is Budgie.
Brilliant. Love it. Absolutely love that. So here you are. You played for East Fremantle juniors, and by the age of 16, you obviously made a big impression because you debuted with the seniors. So here's the little Budgie playing with the big men. How on earth was that, mixing it in such an era with Giant?
Well, look, I suppose, I was lucky. There was a spot when I first went down to East Fremantle. So I went through the grades, obviously, at East Fremantle. And then, and because I was so small, so in those days, there were 4 grades before you got to the league. And I did all of those in the one season. And I actually roved and we won the premiership in my second year. So when I was 17, I played in a premiership side. And the first rover was Graham Melrose. Now, I don't know if you remember him, but he was a really great player for North Melbourne. And he left in 1974 to go to North Melbourne and eventually, played 5 or 6 years and was a great player for North Melbourne. So that gave me the opportunity to be first rover at East Fremantle.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. Well, you obviously made a big impact because I understand by 1979, not only were you named in the All-Australian team, but you represented the WA state team and made a really big impression at State of Origin level. How was that thrill for you and playing against some of the greats of the game?
Yeah, and it was interesting because in those days, in the 70s was the start of the transition of West Australians going to Victoria.
Right.
So there was quite an influx of players in the sort of mid 70s, and eventually, obviously, in the 80s, everyone went to Melbourne. So everyone's aim was to go to Melbourne. But I didn't actually go until I was 25. And at 25, I've spent I had already spent, about 6 or 7 years at East Fremantle. So I was fairly entrenched and my love for East Fremantle meant that I had no massive desire to go to Melbourne. But it got to the stage where, and it was probably from 1979, that the VFL at the time was far superior to Waffle. And it was just too enticing to go over. But I only had one club that ever showed any interest in me, which was Essendon.
Wow.
And so I did jump at the opportunity when it came. And so I signed. Well, in those days, you had Form 4s. There was no draft. And so I signed a Form 4 with Essendon and left. I didn't go the next year, but I went in 1981. So, yeah.
Amazing. So is it true though? So only one club contacted you, and Kevin Sheedy himself said, "Do you know what? You're too small, you're too slow, but come down and do a pre-season anyway." Not the biggest endorsement and confidence for you to cross the
No, no. Well, what had happened was Barry Davis. I signed up in 1979 with Barry Davis as the coach.
Oh.
And then I didn't go to Melbourne the next year, and then Sheedy got appointed coach. And actually, I had to ring him. So I rang Sheedy. Sheedy was made coach, and I was supposed to be coming over maybe 6 weeks later to start my career at Essendon. And I thought, hang on, Sheedy's just been appointed coach. I better just see whether he wants to. And you're 100% right. That's exactly what he said to me. But I started the pre-season in October. So I had been there all through the pre-season. And it was it was a really hard year because Sheedy, obviously from the Tom Hafey days, he was a really strict coach. And we were the baby bombers at that stage. And it was a case of Sheedy bringing the toughness into the game of the Essendon players who, as the baby bombers. So it was a really hard pre-season, but it was certainly a great initiation for me to be, to be grounded for the start of my VFL career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, this is a Bulldog podcast, but I want to explore a little bit of the Bombers first because your career took off in 1981, didn't it? You played every game. You were the best first-year player, so it obviously agreed to you. Do you put that down to sort of playing with men for all those number of years?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. At 25, I mean, really, you play your best footy from 25 to 29. There's about a 4-year window. You're not afraid of the opposition. You're physically strong as you're going to get. Obviously, you've got to hope that you haven't got injuries. And so that sort of window at 25, I was really keen. And especially, I suppose, as you said, when I made a few state games, I thought, yeah, I wouldn't mind having a crack at VFL, but I was always petrified. And when I played against Lee Matthews, which was in round 3, I was petrified. Like to play against Lee Matthews, yeah, and you couldn't tackle him. I mean, he fended off better than anyone else ever has. And so it was impossible to tackle him. So it was sort of this massive, I was thrilled just to be in the environment, so it was amazing I loved my time at Essendon. And that first year, we did have a good year.
Yeah, and in fact, all 4 years you played at the Bombers, you made finals, didn't you? So what a golden era to be a part of it. And I guess you played with some remarkable champions of that era. What was it like playing with some of those Bomber players?
Well, for a start, to rove to Simon Madden for all those years. I mean, Simon was an amazing player, but the one thing he could do was he would tap the ball so well. And he would just say, get over there and I'll put it. And he would put it there 8 times out of 10. So it was your job. All I had to do was be where he wanted me to be, which is the perfect thing for a rover. So I actually had it lucky. It was luck more than anything else that I would have Simon Madden as my number 1 ruckman. But yeah, Tim Watson, the Danahers, Neil Danaher in that first year. He won the best and fairest. He was only, I think, 19 or 20 at that time. And I mean, it's so sad that he broke down virtually the next year. And they made him captain in 1982. Wow. So he was just, some of the players there that were amazing. And then eventually they were, obviously, by time 84, 85, 3 grand finals in a row, Hawthorn versus Essendon. Sheedy was a great coach. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I've just got one more thing I want to explore about your time at the Bombers. So 1984, the Bombers were a juggernaut, weren't they? 83, it ended unceremoniously against Hawthorn in the grand final, but you came back with retribution. And although you had some troubles with your knee, you came back at the back end of that season in 84 and put in a sterling performance in the prelim final from memory. You probably had around 23, 25 touches, kicked a goal. You guys won by about 140 points. There's no way you're changing that winning team. But can you tell us what happened for you to not play in that grand final premiership?
Yeah, well, I'd missed 10 games that season, which was the only time in my whole sort of career with Essendon and Footscray where I had a bad injury, but that was a stress fracture on my foot. So that kept me out for about the 10 weeks. Then when I came back, in that 10-week period, Alan Ezard and Darren Williams had started to play really well. So I could sort of sense as I was coming back in that period that these two young blokes Essendon had not missed me at all. So they were doing really well. I didn't play in the first final. And then Sheedy played me in the preliminary final, as you said, which, we did well, but we thrashed, I think it was Collingwood that day. Yeah, I think it was. Anyway, so I knew it was always hard to get a game, but on the Friday or Thursday night, he picked the side and I was the first emergency for the grand final in 84. And he said, if it rains, you're playing. If there's no rain, you're out. So on the Saturday morning, there was massive clouds all day, but not one drop of rain. So I didn't fall my way. But, look, they won and won. It was a great game. I would have absolutely loved to have played in a premiership with Essendon. That would have been my dream come true, I suppose. But, it didn't. But it was. And then Darren Williams and Alan Ezard went on to have great careers. So the coach was right again, Sheedy, in not picking me. That was a good side, Essendon, in those days.
Wow, yeah. Look, I've spoken to Frank Kennel, who used to coach me in the amateurs, and he's had a similar sort of fate on grand final day where he was sort of moved out, and he described it almost like a trauma that never left him, of being omitted at the last minute. Do you hold any grudges, or it sounds like you understand it and sort of a process?
No, I was bitter and twisted for a long time.
Right.
But then reality comes in as we get older. I mean, it's 40 years ago now. It actually helped me a lot in life.
Wow.
Because you got to understand you can't take anything for granted, and you've got to cop your setbacks. And though I was shattered for a long time, the reality of it wasn't to be, and what's not to be, you're drawn a set of cards and that's it. But in life, I reckon, it's all that matters to you at the time, but it certainly served me well. And I've got nothing but admiration for Kevin Sheedy. He made the right call. They won the game. If you win the game, if you win the grand final, the coach is right. How can you complain? But Frank Kennel, actually, he was a very good player, and he got injured that in that grand final. And then he played and he did play the next year, though, didn't he? No, sorry, he played in 84. Yes.
84, yeah.
He played the premiership in 84.
Yeah.
And then he must have been dropped for 85.
Dropped for 85, that's right. I believe he got a call at the last minute, and Sheeds played some ducks and drakes while he was eating his breakfast. I think he nearly swallowed his cornflakes down the wrong way, but that was the end of his time at the Bombers. So there you are. Look, there's some ups and downs, but it sounds like you've taken the learnings from it.
Yeah. Look, that's what life is all about.
Yeah, love that. Yeah, amazing. And look, you travelled over the Westgate a couple of times, didn't you, to play against the Doggies back in red and black colours. What was it like from an opposition point of view, coming down to the Kennel, facing the Footscray crowd, being in those Bulldog visitor change rooms? Was it a very hospitable place?
Look, it wasn't when I was playing for Essendon. No, I mean the guys at Footscray were always good. Players were always. There was never. I cannot recall any time where I was sort of like I hated Collingwood. To go to Victoria Park was awful. St Kilda, they'd wet the grounds, so it was always mud. It was always just a real hard grind. But Western Oval, there was a howling sea breeze always, so you had to worry about the sea breeze. But apart from that, no, the Doggies were, and Essendon's very close to Footscray, so there was always an alignment, which to me was not a problem.
Gotcha. Look, you always seem to play well against us. I went back and had a look at the stats, and you seem to dominate. Back in those days, am I right in saying you were assigned a particular player more often than not? Were there any Bulldog players? Was it like a Jeff Jennings or a Steve Wallace that you often went to, or did they mix it up a bit with you?
Well, I think obviously Brian Royal, I think he started about 1983. So he'd been 2 years into the system that I had been in before he came. And he had an amazing impact right at the start. Yeah. If you remember, I think in 83, and I think they were the years, I think, that Jimmy Sewell and Andrew Purser arrived.
Yep.
So, and I was always really good mates with both of them at East Fremantle. So, and Jim Sewell's still a best mate of mine.
Oh.
We're still so close. And part of the reason why I wanted to go to Footscray was because, Jimmy and Andrew were there. In fact, there was a massive West Australian contingent in that 1 year that I was there. There were 7 of us. So, with Simon Beasley obviously being and Brad Hardy winning the Brownlow. Then there was Ian Williams and Alan Daniels. So it was a fantastic contingent. And Jimmy Sewell was I played sort of all the way through with him. So look, I just loved being at Footscray.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Shane O'Sullivan must have liked the Western Australians, that's for sure. He brought enough of you across. I love that.
Yeah, he did. And what had actually happened was I was going back home to East Fremantle. Right. So I'd left Essendon in '84 and I packed my bags. We moved back to Perth and Shane O'Sullivan rang me up and said, "Hey, what about coming over and playing for Footscray?" And I said, "Look, I'd like to, but no chance. Not with Mick Malthouse as coach." And he's going, "What's your problem?" And I said, "Mate, he was filthy. He was this," because right at the very first time we played Richmond, and Malthouse was always the back pocket specialist. So I'd come off the ball and I would sort of sit in the forward pocket. And then obviously my job was to try and kick a few goals. He'd belt the shit out of me every time. He would just say, he used to jumper punch. So he'd grab my jumper and just keep punching me. So I just had enough of it. I'd had enough and I hated playing on Mick Malthouse. And on one occasion, I kicked him in the shins and he just went berserk. So there was this massive rivalry. If anyone, of any player that I was in fear of was Mick Malthouse, because he would belt me so many times. So I said, "There's no chance I'm going to Footscray under Mick Malthouse." And he would have rung me maybe a day or two later and he said, "Look, my playing days are all finished. I reckon you can add value. I would love it if you came to the club." So it was the best thing that I ever did. And just loved the move. I just enjoyed it so much, but I already had knee issues at that stage. And so by the end of 1985, I knew I was shot to bits.
Yep. Okay. All right. We'll get to that. Well, here we are. We've made it to 1985. You've said, Shane O'Sullivan's brought you across. Talk us through walking through the Kennel doors the first day. You must have been shaking at the knees. You're facing Mickey Malthouse, your old adversary. How was it?
No, look, he was fantastic. He really welcomed me well. As I said to you before, the fact that Jim Sewell, Andrew Purser, Brad Hardy, that was his first year as well, and he'd come over with Alan Daniels. So, there was a strong contingent. Beasley had come a year or two earlier, as had Ian Williams. So, look, I felt at home. It's one of those things where I felt so easily at home. I lived in Moonee Ponds all the way through my time at Essendon. So Moonee Ponds is only around the corner from Western Oval. So, yeah, it was a very smooth transition to Footscray.
That's awesome to hear. And look, I know we had a fantastic pre-season. We won most of our games and the optimism started to return because we hadn't played finals since 1976. It was a long gap. You've come from a successful club for the Bombers, and here you are, sort of in a team that hasn't tasted anything. Was that sort of confronting for you?
No, not at all. No, not at all. In fact, and I suppose the way I was welcomed, it was as if you could sense that these guys were, they were good players. And it was a bit like when I went to Essendon when they were the baby Bombers. A lot of the players were the baby doggies. You look at Wallace, Royal, Gronewegan, just great players. And Dougie Hawkins was at his peak. I reckon 85 was just the prime of Doug Hawkins. So I was so lucky to play with him.
Yeah, could imagine. And look, he'll be the first to tell me that as well, Budge. Don't worry about that. And Dougie talks about how we got off to a flyer that year. I remember being in the crowd. It was down at Princes Park. We played against Carlton and we absolutely smashed them. Can you remember your first outing in the red, white and blue?
Well, I can remember the first 3 or 4 games.
Right.
The first 3 or 4 games, and I've gone, God, these guys can play. They are seriously good. But the absolute ultimate for me was round 5.
Right.
When Essendon were undefeated and they came to Western Oval. So, and I was on Neil Clark, who I was really good friends with at the time when I was at Essendon. And he was giving me a bit of a hard time. But we beat him by 5 goals, 4 or 5. So he was to beat Essendon at Western Oval in front of all the Dog fans was just amazing.
Wow.
So that would have been my highlight of the season.
Oh.
Was to certainly in my case, but no, you just could tell that these guys were seriously. Rick Kennedy, I mean, he was a very good player. Then Peter Foster had come from Fitzroy, I think, and he all of a sudden he emerged as a really good centre half back. So it was actually just a very strong side.
Yeah. We had the pieces coming together. We had like Mick McLean running off the half back line.
That's right.
We had Super McPherson just cutting them up.
And then you've got guys like Lally Bambley. I mean, he kicked 50 goals.
Yes.
Looking back, I was just looking through it. He kicked 50. Beasley's kicked over 100. What a great year Simon had that year. So it was just it would have been amazing to have played in a grand final, and we only lost to Hawthorn by 10 points in the preliminary final.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was what it was.
Absolutely. And look, speaking of goals, you up until that Essendon game, you kicked 12 goals in the first 4 games. So you were, you said how important it is to kick 2 goals a game to keep your spot. You're averaging 3, and you became sort of a cult hero really quickly. Everyone just loved the Budgie. You find goals, you're electric. You had the big smile on your face, pumping up the Bulldog crowd. Can you tell us a little bit about your love of kicking goals and also sort of the impact that the Bulldog crowd and faithful had on you?
Well, it was also the style of play that we had, though I must admit, I would get the runner come out at least half a dozen times each game saying, get out and give room for Beasley, because I was too busy thinking that I could possibly mark the ball when it was way over my head. And all I was doing was interfering with Simon Beasley's path. So the coach was not happy with that. But it was, I mean, there's also, as a player, there's an instinctive nature when you want to be at the fall of the ball and, you've got to read the play. The secret now, and I think a lot of today's football, coaches don't allow players to have their natural ability to read the play.
Right.
I was always trying to be at the fall of the ball, and it was always a fight between Bamblett there were a lot of goal kickers. I mean, Jock Edmonds, he kicked a lot of goals that season as well. So between Beasley, Lally, myself, there were a lot of guys that were kicking 30, 40 goals for the season. So, we could score goals. There wasn't an issue there. And out of the centre, Steve Wallace, he really matured to that was his best season, I reckon. And of course, Brad Hardy, the drive that he was giving out of the back line. So it was a very creative style of football that we were playing, which was really exciting.
Yeah, we in fact we kicked more goals in 1985 than any other season in our club's history. So it was obviously,
is that right?
Yeah, that's right. It was obviously just ahead of 1978. So it was obviously a really exciting brand we were playing. You also had Choco Royal, who kicked 30 odd as well. You kicked 36. And Super McPherson. So there were a lot of goal kickers.
Absolutely. Steve McPherson was the other one. He was, he kicked 39. It was just it was good footy.
Right.
It was really good footy, and just that maybe it was the wide wings as well. And then you got Dougie Hawkins, who was just amazing. And then Phil Malin came in that year. I reckon he played very well as well. So he had a big impact. It was just a great year.
Yeah. We're having the Shark on soon, and you know what? He cut it up on the wing, didn't he? Opposite the Hawk. So what a team. We always ask our players, can you distill your time at the Bulldogs down to 4 players? If you had to carve Tony Buhagiar's Mount Rushmore, 4 faces into the side of a cliff face, which 4 Bulldogs would be up there?
Well, I reckon if we're talking toughness, Rick Kennedy, without a doubt. Like he was, and he didn't mind belting blokes. He was, and so he, and I think was he captain? No, Edmund. Jock was it. Jock was the captain. But I'd say, you know, in the back line, certainly you want him. Dougie Hawkins, he's just a freak. He was just such a nice bloke. Obviously, Beasley had this amazing year. So then you get down to, I'd say, Brian Royal. So there are my four that I would say you just got to have them in your side. And part of the reason why we were so good was because of those four players, from the back line to the forward line. You know, Beasley every week, he was kicking 7 and 8s and that sort of stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah, how good is that? Well, you know what? You did well to squeeze 4 because I reckon you could have put another mountain up there because it was a team and a half.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, from the WA contingent that we had,
yep.
Andrew Purser was fantastic in the ruck.
Yep.
I mean, he was a really good player, and very underrated was Jim Sewell.
Right.
Jim Sewell was a fantastic player. And I think in the end, he started in the back line at Footscray, but he ended up in the forward line. And he played, I think, in all the finals, he would have been at centre half forward. So, yeah, look, just a great year.
Yeah. Thanks, Tony. Well, you know what? You mentioned Rick Kennedy, and obviously toughness is something that you value. Now, I don't know if you know this, but Ronnie Andrews, the pig shooter of all people, he described you as the toughest player he ever played with. I don't know if you know that, but what was it that made you such that sort of pugnacious, incredible character?
Well, for him to say that, what had actually happened was in our first intra-club, right? So we were playing between each other. And as I'd said to you earlier about Simon Madden, so in the very first bounce down, the ball's gone up. Simon Madden has just beautifully palmed it straight to me. I've gone, how good's this? You know, this is easy. So I've got the ball. I've run forward. And all of a sudden, I've just copped from the side, didn't see it, this massive elbow from Ron Andrews straight to my head. So I'm lying on the ground. There was blood pouring out. In those days, you didn't have the blood rule where you had to come off. I was waiting for a trainer to come out to you know, do something. No one came, which amazed me. So I just thought, oh, God, they're tough over here in Melbourne. You know, you'd think the runner or someone would come out and just, because there was blood coming out everywhere, and I had to have stitches. And I said, oh, well, I'll just get up and play on. If that's, you know, no one came out. So after the game, I said to him, Ronnie, what was that for? Did you have to belt me? And he said, mate, you West Australians are weak. I wanted to test you to see whether you had any balls. And you did the right thing, so yeah, you're okay. So that was my induction into the first bounce down at Essendon.
Yeah, welcome to Windy Hill. Love it.
Yeah, and no, but I mean, footy was tough in Melbourne. You know, like it was the VFL in those days. You couldn't be afraid. You had to go in hard. And you had to cop whatever you did. Guys like, can you remember when Dipia Domenico just smashed Alan Stoneham?
Right.
And like really smashed him. And he's suffering badly out of it now. You know, it's not good. It's not good with some of the things that did happen, but it was tough, hard football.
Yeah, absolutely it was. And that's made for the Maltese, Tony. Don't worry about that. Love it.
Yeah, well, no, it was a great experience for me, and I just love my time.
Yeah. Look, we won 11 out of 12 games leading into finals. The only loss that we did have was against the old Bombers at Windy Hill in that patch. So, leading into the finals, did you believe that we could be a sneaky chance to take the flag, or was that a fanciful sort of supporter belief?
Oh no, definitely not. I mean, I did think, in all fairness, Essendon were on top. And I think they only lost 2 or 3 games, but we beat them. One of them was us, and we were second on the ladder. So to be second on the ladder, you know, you can't turn around and say you're not a chance. Things had to go our way. We did do really well against North Melbourne. I think we beat them well. In the preliminary final, we were coming back, but Hawthorn was sort of in charge in the first half. And then I think it was sort of more towards in the last quarter, we got to within 10 points. But we could easily have been in the grand final, and who knows? you know. So it was just a great year for Footscray. And unfortunately, yeah, we couldn't get to the stage of getting in the grand final.
Yeah, I was in grade 3 at the time in 1985, and I just remember the tears that flowed because we were right on the edge, weren't we? I think moving into three-quarter time, we hit the lead early in the last with a Simon Beasley goal, so it was right there in our grasp. Peter Foster, speaks about just little tiny moments in the game. Do you remember anything in that game that that could have been done differently, or was it just meant to be that way?
Yeah, look, I think that's the way it is. I was actually on the bench for most of the day.
Oh.
So in that game, I only came on in the last sort of 15 to 20 minutes. So I can't remember much about the game, but we were never, sort of really we were just coming back towards the end of the third quarter and the last quarter. It was a lot closer. We had chances, but we never seemed to be able to grab them. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned Lee Matthews earlier. I think he sprung up and kicked a few goals on Brad. Now, Brad he was dominating that game, but his style wasn't it? Was just to flow forward and just be that offensive running, back pocket.
Which Malthouse hated.
Right.
Malthouse, he was always the back pocket specialist who would just stay on his man and be forever ferocious and tough. Whereas Brad, I think, was the first player to really, as a backman, take the game on and play this very offensive game of football where he would just run off his man and back himself in, and 9 times out of 10 he got it. And he'd take 2 to 3 bounces down the wing, and has had a massive change in how the game is played. And now it's all about a defensive backman being an attacking player.
I remember that so fondly. We were so excited by it, but the mentality was always from the coaches: stick on your player.
So Malthouse and Brad always clashed, and that's why he only lasted 2 or 3 years. Yeah, but oh no, I mean Brad really had a great. That was his first year. How good was that?
Win a Brownlow in your first year, unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yep. Hey, Tony, tell us a little bit about some of your greatest opponents. Who stood out for you as ones that you just found incredible?
Well, obviously Lee Matthews, because he was still roving at the start. So as a rover, and yet he was so good at full forward towards the end of his career. So as a rover, I mean, he was the hardest. Rod Ashman was a great player from Carlton.
Yeah.
There was a massive rivalry between the Crackers and me. So Jim and Phil Cracker, when I was at East Fremantle, so back in WA, they were sensational. Jimmy Cracker could play. And so there was enormous rivalry, and he probably, I think he still had a great career in Melbourne, but people didn't appreciate just how good he was. I mean, he could play. But look, every player was having, there's no easy games in Melbourne. In those days, there was always someone tough and hard to play on, and it was just great footy.
Yeah, love to hear that. Well, 1985 didn't end up well for us, and if you stayed at the Bombers, you may have ended up being a premiership player. But whenever I talk to Dougie Hawkins about how the season ended, he believes, with every fibre of his body that we would have been able to beat the Bombers that year. Do you share that sentiment?
Look, I think we were playing better mid-season than we were at the end.
Sure.
I think we had sort of peaked. It was also amazing when you look at how many players played every game. So we had something. When I just had a look a little while ago, and we had something like 12 players who played over 20 games.
Amazing.
So there was 5 or 6 that played 25 games, but we had over 12. No, hang on. I wrote it down. 16 players who played over 20 games. So it was a long year for everyone. And in my case in particular as well, I got to play every game, which was 25, but I was gone by the end of the year. I reckon we peaked around about sort of round 16 or 17. We still did well to end up playing second, to come second. But yeah, it was just a long year by a lot of players, and it showed just how lucky we were that we didn't have any serious injuries. So yeah, look, I sort of understand what Dougie's saying. We were always in the hunt. You could never take us for granted, but I reckon we sort of might have just peaked before the finals.
Yeah, gotcha. Well, it sounds like fatigue must have played some part, with such a long season and, having to face up front up week after week. And I guess that was the end for you in some ways. You played all 25 games, as you say, but then you hung up the boots from VFL.
But I knew that I was shot.
Right.
I knew my knees. I had bad knee injuries when I was 19. So I had 2 to 3 years back in Perth where I really struggled. And I knew that there was, I was having to have injections every week to be able to allow me to play. And then my knee would swell up for 2 or 3 days, and then I'd come good by the following Saturday. But I knew that, my time had come.
Right. Okay.
It was a great way to finish my career, to be a part of that team, and more importantly, just how great the players were. It was just a fun year. It was seriously, and obviously we had that trip at the end of the year, which was a disaster. When we went away on our end of season trip, and got kicked off the plane. But at the end of the day, it was all because we were having fun. I don't think we did anything really bad. We didn't, injure anyone, or there was no dramas. But in those days, when the season finished, players had a lot of fun, and you'd have this mad trip. And unfortunately, those days are all gone now. You don't have it, but I just enjoyed the players. I enjoyed the friendship, and more importantly, I suppose it was a great season for Footscray, which I'll always treasure.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And for me as a supporter, I just fell in love with the club that season. And I just look back at it. I look at replays even today and just go, "Wow, how good was that?" I see it still from 9-year-old my eyes. So
Well done.
yeah, your contribution, unbelievable. So thank you, Tony. And you talk about your last hurrah. You weren't done and dusted. We did get on that plane and take off to Honolulu for a bit of fun. Is there anything you can share from that doomed flight?
Oh, look, I think, which I'm sure most people would know, would be Captain Gronewegan. I mean, that was the one. You've heard that story, surely. But when we were in the back third of the plane, so it was one of those big, huge things. So we're in the back third, and we were probably, the majority of the people were in that back third. So there weren't that many others. But he grabbed the microphone, and when he grabbed the microphone and said, "Now, Captain Gronewegan speaking. Captain Gronewegan speaking. Can you please assume crash landing position? One engine's failed, and we're going down." So we were all laughing our heads off, thinking, "How good's this?" But that was. Now, can you imagine if he had done that today?
Oh.
What would have happened? Where would he have? He would have ended up being kicked off and put in jail. It wasn't as if we did things that were that bad. I think that Qantas stewards had enough of footballers on football trips, and when we arrived in Honolulu, they just said, "That's it. You're off. We're out. We're not having you back on the plane." But even still, we managed to have a great trip. We went to America, and we had a fantastic time. So yeah, I think it was the end of football trips for players.
I bet it was. I heard you almost got yourself a little souvenir though.
There was a plaque at the back of the plane which I chipped away, and I thought, yeah, this would be a nice one. So I did get it and put it in my bag. And then as we were being kicked off the plane, the captain said, "Right, who's got the plaque?" And I was a bit worried because I obviously knew I had it. And I waited a few minutes, and I was trying to think of the options. How can I get out of this? But I was snookered. I had no choice. I had to cough up, and I gave it back to him, and then we were kicked off the plane.
Yeah. Ricky Kennedy and Zeno Tatsaris dobbed you in on their episodes on that. So thanks for learning it. No mates in footy. Good.
No. It was all good fun.
Thanks, Budgie. I love that. We're coming close to the end of the podcast. I want to ask you returned to East Fremantle, And you finished your decorated career, didn't you, after 1 year there, and were named in the Western Australian Hall of Fame. Can you tell us what an unbelievable honour that must be?
Look, it is certainly for me because I just love football. I love football. I'm addicted to it. It's been so dominant in my life, and I'm so grateful. But then last year, to be inducted was a surprise. I mean, I didn't think 40 years after I'd retired that I'd get in the Hall of Fame. But then when Fremantle started, I went on the board. So I was on the board of Fremantle for 10 years.
Right.
And I still am a very active member of the Fremantle Football Club because that's home. That's where my home is. And so I enjoy it. But I just love footy. So then to be inducted in the Hall of Fame, amazing honour. And I'm thrilled to bits to be able to do that. Just I look back and the friendships that you make and the bond and just the thrill with the supporters that it's like being in a war and you're all in the trenches together. It's got this fantastic feel about it.
Oh.
So, love my footy. Just love it.
Oh, I can hear it in your voice, Tony. I love that, Budge. Now, Budgie, without a word of warning, and we love putting our players in the hot seat here, we end our podcast with a 1-minute quiz. Now, we've got a leaderboard, and at the moment, Daniel Cross sits at the top. The player who's at the top at the end of the year challenges Dougie Hawkins in a final, and that winner gets a portrait painted of them by one of the famous Bulldog artists. So you're in it to win it. Tony, today.
Yeah, okay. What is it? Just what sort of quiz?
It's a Bulldog quiz, and I'm going to give you a little bit of power. 60 seconds on the clock. You can choose the category. Would you like to choose the topic season 1985 or Dougie Hawkins?
I don't. I'll go season 85.
All right.
Go season.
All right. Well, you know a lot about it. So let's go. The time will start after the first question. Good luck, Budge. Here we go. Question 1. Tony Buhagiar played in every game in 1985. Is that true or false?
Yeah, true.
Correct. And number 2, Steve Wallace won the 1985 Sutton Medal. Is that true or false?
He won the best and fairest.
False. It was Hawkins. Number 3, Bulldogs played Hawthorn 4 times in 1984. Is that true or false?
False.
It's true. How many goals did Beasley kick in 85?
105.
Correct. Who scored the next most goals?
Elliot Bamblett.
Correct. That's right. What was the nickname of Mickey Ford?
Oh God, I can't remember that. No.
Fruitcake. Who scored a goal within the first minute of the prelim final against Hawthorn? One of your old mates.
Would be Sewell.
Correct. Which player imitated a pilot at the end of the season trip?
Gronewegan. Yeah, of course. Gronewegan. Of course.
Well, look, you've done incredibly well. We'll get the scores up on the board right now. Here it comes on the board now. Oh, you've done incredibly well, Budgie. Not quite at the top, but well done, mate.
Oh, well, no. There was I should have known some of those questions. You're right. But, yeah, that's the way it goes.
That's the way it goes. Just like your career. There's highs and lows always, Budgie. And listen, our final question is, what is your message to Bulldog supporters who've loved and adored you, and how would you like to be remembered?
Well, look, I would have loved to have played more footy at Bulldogs. I mean, to have that 1 year, in the end, it's injuries that get you. I would have loved to have played on because it was genuinely like a family club. You know, your supporters, the supporters were fantastic, and I suppose it's what footy's all about. It's not just playing on the field with great teammates and all the rest of it. It's the camaraderie, and it's just being involved in a club which are just grassroots football. So, you know, I loved my year at Bulldogs. I wish it could have been more.
Oh, that is music to my ears, Budge. Well, Bulldog supporters are going to drink this up. I want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts for everything you gave to the club and for your time today. It's been an honour and a privilege for me. Well, as the Maltese say, Tony, Inti Hobbeck, Yina Hafna. Ladies and gentlemen, the great Tony Budgie Buhagiar!
Thanks a lot. Great to be here. Well done. Bye.
Red in my heart, white in my veins, blue in my eye, red, white, and blue in my brain.